You don't realize the last moment you're truly happy. Until much later. For me, it was a Sunday morning for months ago. I was standing in the kitchen, slicing a mango, planning a surprise trip for our 10-year anniversary. She was humming upstairs. Some melody I didn't know. Our dog was curled up by the window. Sunlight filled the room like a movie scene. And then she walked in with her overnight bag. And didn't kiss me. She always kissed me. Even if we were in a rush, even if we were annoyed, even if it was just a peck on the cheek, there was always a kiss. That morning, she walked right past me. And I swear, something broke. So quietly, it didn't even make a sound. Her name is Sophie. She's a botanist. Not the kind you see with dirt under their nails, planting daisies in someone's backyard. No, she's the brilliant kind. The featured in research journals kind. For the past 2 years, she'd been running a project funded by a prestigious ecological foundation. Some kind of high-security greenhouse built on the grounds of a remote estate in the Rockies. I'm Daniel. I deal in numbers. Financial projections, corporate audits, data patterns. I don't work with things that bloom, I work with things that balance. We made an odd couple. She was air and roots. I was concrete and calculation. But we worked. At least I thought we did. Since her greenhouse was in the mountains. Isolated, secure. I'd drive up every Sunday with fresh groceries. We'd talk for 15 minutes. Sometimes eat lunch on the hood of the car. Then I'd leave, and she'd disappear behind the locked steel gate. I never went inside. Not once. Everything's sterile, she used to say. Humidity levels are calibrated to the micron. A single breath could ruin the equilibrium. I believed her, or rather, I trusted her. But over time, the distance between us grew wider than just the mountain road. She started answering fewer texts. Her voice on the phone felt like a stranger's. Even her smell changed. It used to be lavender and cedarwood. One day it was something sharp. Something sweet in a way that didn't feel natural. Still, I pushed those doubts aside. Told myself I was being paranoid. Relationships go through phases. Maybe she was just under pressure. Until one Sunday, the road to her greenhouse was closed. Rockslide. No way through. I waited for hours as crews tried to clear the path. I called Sophie, no signal. I stared up at those mountains, at the fog that swallowed the pines, and something inside me said, walk. So I did. With 2 bags of groceries in hand, I hiked 5 miles through cold forest trails, boots slipping on wet rocks. I knew there was an old maintenance path along the east slope. Sophie had mentioned it once in passing. It led me to a gate I'd never seen before, hidden behind overgrown ivy, halfway covered by a rusted sheet of fencing. Unlocked. My breath hitched. Part of me wanted to turn back. This was her workspace, her world. I wasn't invited, but something stronger pulled me forward. I stepped inside, and what I found wasn't a greenhouse. It was a stage, a curated dream world, a place built for more than plants. I stood there, frozen, as a dozen questions flooded my mind. None with answers I wanted. And that's where everything began to unravel. The moment I stepped inside, I knew something was off. It wasn't the plants. They were thriving, lush, healthy, vibrant. It wasn't the heat either, though the air was thick, warmer than expected. It was the smell. Not unpleasant, but unfamiliar, deep, engineered. It wasn't a scent that belonged in nature. It belonged to something crafted. I followed the winding path deeper into the greenhouse. Ferns brushed against my sleeves. Lights above were soft, filtered through vines and glass. The place felt more like a stage set than a research lab. Every detail precise, arranged. At first, I thought maybe I was just overreacting. Maybe this was part of her method. She always talked about creating environments that triggered responses in people and plants. But then I saw the equipment. Small cameras nearly hidden in the foliage. One tucked behind an orchid. Another high in a corner, angled toward a seating area surrounded by blooming vines. Nothing obvious. Nothing theatrical. But definitely watching. And next to the seating area, on a small table, was a notebook, a diffuser, and a microphone. I approached carefully. The notebook was open. Test entry 32. Blend 4A. Subject appeared hesitant, then more conversational. Laughter noted at 4 minutes, 12 seconds. Described the atmosphere as calming and safe. Follow-up declined due to schedule. I flipped the page. More test logs. Different names. Different responses. Not numbers or charts, observations. How someone felt. How their mood shifted. How they behaved in the space she had created. Another entry read, Blend 7B prompted openness. Subject shared personal story unprompted. Noted emotional clarity afterward. The tone was scientific, but the subject matter? Deeply personal. On the wall nearby was a corkboard with printed images, some candid, others framed deliberately. Sophie sitting across from people. In conversation. Sharing tea. Smiling. Leaning in as if the world outside didn't exist. No photo was inappropriate, but all of them were intimate. Not in a romantic sense, but emotionally close. That's what made it strange. It didn't look like research. It looked like connection. Carefully guided. Documented. I took a step back, heart pacing. Then I heard it. Soft voices recorded. Playing through a speaker nearby. Snippets of quiet conversation. Calm male voices. Hesitant. Thoughtful. It's weird, but being here makes me feel grounded. This place is peaceful. I haven't felt like this in a long time. There's something about her presence. It's hard to explain. And then Sophie's voice, measured and clear. You're responding to the environment. It's designed to help you feel more centered. More open. And I realized she wasn't just working with plants anymore. She was working with people. Testing not just how they smelled something, but how they felt. How they responded to her presence. Her space. Her formula. And the most unsettling part? She was very, very good at it. The greenhouse had a second wing. I didn't even notice the doorway at first. It was hidden behind a curtain of ivy, half obscured by a hanging fern. But as I stepped closer, I saw the outline of the arch. A hallway extended beyond it, darker, quieter, less dressed up than the front. And colder, somehow. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to turn back, to pretend this was enough. That what I'd seen so far already explained everything. But it didn't. It only made me need to know more. The hallway led to what looked like a storage room. But it was anything but. There were filing cabinets. Labeled shelves. A row of hard drives stacked like novels. More notebooks, dozens of them. Her handwriting on every spine. In the center of the room stood a wide wooden table with a series of folders laid out neatly in a grid. Names on the tabs. First names only. 1 word each. And dates. I opened the first one. Inside were printouts. Profiles. Each folder was a subject. A person. Each profile began the same way. Subject ID, name. Baseline temperament, traits. Exposure history, scent profiles tested. Observed shifts, emotional response / behavioral notes. Every entry was structured, detailed, but unmistakably personal. One subject, Evan, had 3 pages of logs. Initial resistance to blend 3B. Displayed guarded demeanor. Day 2, more relaxed posture. Expressed interest in Sophie's past. Day 3, admitted feelings of nostalgia associated with specific floral notes. Day 4, requested extended session. Denied per protocol. I flipped through more. Different men. Different responses. Same Sophie. Some of the profiles had post-session surveys attached. Others had transcripts. And then photo logs. Organized. Cataloged. Nothing inappropriate, but deeply intimate in tone, close-ups of expressions, reactions, unguarded moments captured while the subject was listening, laughing, reflecting. I paused on one name. Brian. I knew him. Not well, but well enough. He used to work at a nonprofit Sophie volunteered for, years ago. He once joined us for brunch. I remember he brought muffins. I remember how Sophie smiled that day, warm, bright. Now his name was in a folder alongside a scent chart and a timeline of observed emotional shifts. The deeper I looked, the clearer the picture became. Sophie hadn't just built a greenhouse. She'd built a system. An emotional lab using scent and setting to draw people in, observe them, study them. Not in the way therapists do. Not for healing. For data. And maybe in some way for validation. There was one folder at the end labeled Outliers. It only had 2 names inside. One I didn't recognize. The other was mine. I opened it slowly. Inside, a single sheet. Subject, Daniel. Status, control. Exposure to standard blends, inconclusive. Emotional reactivity, flatline. Interaction style, static/unyielding. Conclusion, immune or overly familiar. Recommendation, no further testing. I stared at the page. My name reduced to metrics. No further testing. That's what I was to her, a control sample that didn't yield results. Not a partner. Not a person. Just a data point. And still, somehow what hurt most wasn't the science. It was the casual way I'd been filed away. Outside the greenhouse, Sophie had always made me feel chosen. Like I was her anchor. Her constant. But in here? I wasn't even part of the real experiment. I was the man outside the lab door. The one with the grocery bags. The one she didn't need to measure because she thought she'd already figured him out. I placed the folder back on the table, my hands trembling. My pulse drumming in my ears. Behind me, the speaker clicked again, another recorded whisper. Do you think this feeling is real? And Sophie's voice. It doesn't matter. You're feeling it. I stood in that room full of evidence, the scent of jasmine and rosemary still lingering in the air, and I finally understood. This wasn't just about betrayal. It was about being used. Quietly. Systematically. With a smile. I didn't hear her enter. One moment I was alone in the archive room, my fingers still hovering over the folder labeled Control. The next, there was a soft shift in the air behind me. And then her voice. You weren't supposed to come here. I turned. Sophie stood in the doorway. Calm. No panic. No guilt. Just the faint disappointment of someone whose privacy had been breached. She wasn't wearing a lab coat anymore, just a dark sweater, sleeves pushed to her elbows as if she'd just come in from the garden. I followed the side trail, I said. She didn't reply. Just studied me. Her gaze dropped to the folder in my hand. You read it. I nodded. All of it. Enough. Silence settled between us like a thick fog. She stepped further into the room, eyes flicking over the notebooks and screens. This wasn't meant to be hidden, she said finally. It's just preliminary. Not ready for outside interpretation. Outside interpretation. As if I were a stranger. Sophie, I said quietly, what is this place, really? She gave a tired smile. It's research. No, I said. This is performance. It's manipulation. You think too small, Daniel. No, I think clearly. You're creating environments to draw people out. You're watching them respond to you. To smells, to sounds, to your presence. You're cataloging emotions like they're chemical reactions. They are, she said. That's not connection. That's control. Her jaw tightened. You always needed things to be obvious, she said. Cause and effect. A problem and a solution. But real connection is messier. It needs pressure. Conditions. Time. No, I replied. Real connection doesn't need a clipboard. We stood there for a moment, staring at each other. Two people who once built a life together, now divided by something far colder than distance. I expected her to argue. To shout. To cry. Instead, she turned and walked to one of the cabinets. From the top drawer, she pulled out a flash drive. She handed it to me without a word. I took it, unsure whether to feel relieved or insulted. What's on this? Everything, she said. The footage. The logs. The scent models. Every variable. Every outcome. Why give it to me? Because you'll make it mean something. One way or another. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't remorse. It was a dare. That night, I drove back to Denver in silence. At home, I plugged in the drive and opened the folders. She hadn't exaggerated. There were recordings, hours of interactions, data sheets, emotional timelines, graphs tracking verbal cadence against exposure to specific olfactory triggers, sophisticated models mapping emotional resonance in relation to scent. But what struck me wasn't the depth of her study. It was the detachment. Everything, every moment of eye contact, every word of trust, every laugh was logged like a lab result. There were no names. Just subject numbers. Responses. Reactions. Revisions. People reduced to trends. Emotions flattened into equations. And there, between logs 34 and 35, I saw it. My own entry. Short. Unchanged. Subject exhibits no deviation. Baseline constant. Suggests no further testing. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I began copying the files. Not out of anger. Out of purpose. Because now I knew what I had to do. Not to hurt her. Not to shame her. But to show the people funding this project exactly what they were supporting. And maybe, just maybe, to remind Sophie that no matter how cleanly you measure a feeling, some things don't fit into boxes. Especially the truth. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was angry. Not even because I was heartbroken. Because for the first time in months I was fully awake. There's a strange clarity that comes after deep betrayal. It doesn't scream. It doesn't throw plates or slam doors. It whispers. Clean. Sharp. Focused. I opened a new folder on my laptop and named it Project Lavender. A quiet nod to the scent Sophie used to wear before all of this. Before she became someone else, or maybe before I saw who she'd been all along. I spent the next day cataloging everything. Videos, notes, scent combinations, emotional progression logs. Everything from her flash drive, backed up and cross-referenced. It was overwhelming but not chaotic. She had documented every interaction with obsessive detail. And now I was doing the same with her. Midway through the folder labeled Session Notes, Phase 2, I found something that shifted the game entirely. An invoice. It was from a private research fund based in San Francisco. Same one I'd seen mentioned in her emails before. Only this time, the billing summary included details Sophie had never shared with me or, I suspected, with them. Line item, Therapeutic Environment Simulations. Line item, Emotion Resonance Protocols, Initial Testing Complete. Line item, Subject Re-engagement Program, on hold. And then the amount. Just over $470,000 paid to her over 18 months. I froze. I'd assumed she was working with grants. But this wasn't academic. This was commercial. Sophisticated. Quietly private. They weren't funding a greenhouse. They were funding an emotional laboratory with Sophie as the primary operator. I found the Foundation's website. Clean, modern. The kind of vague language that screams wealth and secrecy, exploring the frontiers of human connection. Redefining interaction through multisensory design. Empathy engineered. And there, buried in a press release from last year, was Sophie's name. Listed as a lead researcher under the project title, Intimacy Modulation Through Environmental Scripting. I stared at the screen. This wasn't a rogue experiment. This was part of something bigger. And she had never told me. I spent the next 2 hours composing an email to the Foundation's Ethics Oversight Committee. No emotion. No accusation. Just facts. I attached 3 sample video clips. Annotated transcripts showing emotional escalation. The invoice with payment breakdowns. A brief summary of her methodology from her own notes. And a single sentence of commentary. I believe this research involves human emotional experimentation beyond the disclosed scope, conducted without proper consent and documentation. I clicked send. And I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean. Not because I was getting revenge. Because I was choosing clarity. Later that evening, I called a friend from college, a quiet guy named Leon who worked in legal compliance for a private biotech firm. We hadn't spoken in a year. But when I described the situation, he didn't hesitate. I've seen this before, he said. You're doing the right thing. He offered to review everything just to make sure it was airtight. I sent him the folder that night. He replied an hour later, that's more than enough. By midnight, Sophie still hadn't called. But someone else did. A restricted number. A woman's voice on the other end, formal but cautious. We received your message, Mr. Hawthorne. Thank you for your discretion. There will be an internal review. That was all. No promises. No drama. Just confirmation. I sat in the dark for a long time after that. Not because I didn't know what to feel, but because I finally didn't need to feel anything. I'd done what she hadn't. I'd drawn a boundary. And I wasn't going back. There's a kind of silence that doesn't come from peace, it comes from absence. And in the days after the Foundation's response, that silence filled my world. No more documents to prepare. No more flash drives to sort. No more staring at graphs or watching clips I never wanted to see in the first place. My laptop stayed closed. My phone remained silent. The whirlwind was over. But now I had to live in the space it left behind. You expect, after exposing something like that, to feel triumphant. Vindicated. Like justice has a soundtrack and your heart will march with it. But that's not how it works. What I felt was like stepping into a quiet, abandoned house. One I used to live in, filled with echoes of conversations that meant something once but now bounced around hollow walls. I walked through my apartment differently now. Not like a home, but like a museum. I passed the places where we used to talk. Where we laughed. Where I'd once waited for her to text back. The hallway where I stood for 40 minutes after her first night away, convincing myself she was just tired, not distant. Everything had weight now. Every item a timestamp. On the kitchen counter sat a coffee mug with a crack on its rim, one she refused to throw away. It's still useful, she said. Just a little flawed. I kept it. Even now. Not out of nostalgia. Out of respect for the man who once believed her. Because that man, me, he mattered too. And I had to learn not to hate him for being so trusting. I spent 2 days in that echo. Not in despair, but in reflection. Cleaning, cooking, touching the physical world again. Relearning the simple act of doing something for myself. I played an old vinyl I hadn't touched in years. The needle crackled, the room filled with sound, and I let myself lie on the floor and breathe. No more battles. No more suspicion. Just presence. That's when I checked my mailbox. A plain envelope. No return address. Postmarked from downtown. Inside, one letter. Brief. Professional. We acknowledge receipt of your report. The program you referenced has been suspended pending internal review. Your discretion is appreciated. Further updates will not be shared. No signature. No contact. Just closure. I stood in my kitchen, letter in hand, and let the words settle. Sophie's project, her crafted world of scent and emotion, was frozen. Maybe permanently. And strangely, I didn't smile. I just exhaled. Because I finally understood something I hadn't before. Even when the truth is on your side, it doesn't always leave you feeling victorious. Sometimes, it just leaves you feeling honest. And honesty, when you haven't lived in it for a while, is both a relief and a wound. That night, I went to the balcony. Same view, same quiet skyline. But this time, it didn't feel lonely. Felt real. The lavender plant I'd potted weeks ago had started to bloom. Purple buds stretching toward the sky. I knelt down and inhaled. It didn't smell like Sophie. It didn't smell like memory. It smelled like right now. Clean, steady, unaffected. That one breath carried more weight than anything she ever scripted. Because it was mine. Unaltered. Undesigned. Free. And I knew in that moment I was never going back. Not to her, not to that world. Not even to the version of myself that waited outside her greenhouse every Sunday. He was gone. And what stood in his place? Not anger, not bitterness, but something steadier. I didn't need closure from Sophie. I had something better. I had space. And for the first time, it didn't echo. It simply was. I didn't realize how small my life had become until I started to stretch it again. At first, it was just a morning ritual. Wake up. Make real breakfast, not just toast and coffee, but something with color. Eggs with herbs. Sliced fruit. Real plates. No phone in hand. No rush. Then came the walks. I started walking to the same park every day. The one Sophie never liked because it was too plain. A rectangle of grass, a few benches, some older trees. Nothing exotic. Nothing curated. Just space. Simple, honest space. And that's what I needed. I sat there day after day, notebook in hand. Not to write about her, but to write about air. About honesty. About how trust doesn't grow in glass boxes, it grows in dirt. In mess. In mistakes and light. One morning, I looked up from my notes and saw a man in his 50s watering a community garden at the park's edge. He worked slowly, intentionally, each movement quiet but certain. We nodded. The next day, I saw him again. This time, I asked what he was planting. He told me, tomatoes, basil, patience. I laughed, and that's how it started. We talked a little more every day. His name was Al. Retired teacher. Widower. He'd lost his wife 5 years ago. Cancer took her body, he said. But grief almost took me. He said gardening saved him. I don't control the soil, he told me. I just show up and learn from it. I didn't know why that hit so hard until later. Because that's what I'd been missing all along. Sophie never wanted a partner. She wanted an environment she could monitor, predict, measure. But I wasn't a variable. I was a person. And I needed to be somewhere I could exist without being analyzed. So I joined the garden. Started small. A corner plot. Nothing ambitious. Some lavender, of course. And mint. And eventually heirloom carrots just because they looked ridiculous. I got my hands dirty for the first time in years. Not metaphorically. Literally. Knees in the soil. Nails dark with earth. And it felt good. Not triumphant. Not cinematic. Just right. Sometimes, healing doesn't come in grand gestures. It comes in the decision to plant something small and show up for it every day. I didn't tell anyone what I'd been through. Not at first. But the garden didn't ask. It didn't need my backstory. It just gave me space to grow. There were setbacks, of course. A dog tore through my row of seedlings. Heavy rain flattened my basil. Some mornings I wanted to stay in bed and scroll through photos I had long since deleted. But I didn't, because something in me had shifted. Not because of revenge, because of roots. Real ones. One afternoon, I came home from the garden, dirt on my sleeves, sweat on my brow, and I looked at my reflection. Not the broken version of me, not the betrayed husband, just me, tired but present, hurt but steady. And I smiled, not because everything was okay, but because I was okay enough to smile. And that, I realized, was the first bloom of something new. Not love, not hope, something quieter, resilience. It arrived on a Thursday morning, folded between a utilities invoice and a coupon flyer. Plain envelope. No return address. My name written in handwriting I hadn't seen in months, but one I'd once known better than my own. I stood at the kitchen counter, envelope in hand, just staring. I didn't open it right away. I didn't move. I just let it sit there in my palm like a small, silent heartbeat. The room was warm from morning sun. A kettle hissed softly on the stove. Outside, my lavender was in full bloom. I finally sat down. No fear. No anticipation. Just curiosity. Inside, a single sheet of paper, neatly folded, and a flower. An orchid. Dried pressed. Pale white. Carefully preserved. Sophie's favorite. I placed it on the table and unfolded the letter. Dan, I wasn't sure if I should write this, but I knew you'd read it if I did. You always finish things, even the ones that hurt. You have a quiet strength that used to make me feel safe until it made me feel seen. And being seen isn't always comfortable. I leaned back in the chair, feeling the letter more than reading it. Her tone wasn't manipulative. It wasn't even apologetic. It was tired. I know about the review. Not officially. But word gets around. You didn't embarrass me. You didn't destroy my work. You reminded people that what we study isn't more important than who we are. You reminded me too. There was no defensiveness in those lines. And that, more than anything, told me this was real. I could say I'm sorry, but I think that word is too small for the ways I let us fall apart. I never wanted to hurt you, Dan, but I think I stopped noticing when I did. You became the one place I didn't have to perform. And in my obsession with reaction, I forgot how precious that was. I exhaled. Somewhere between grief and forgiveness, there's an ache you don't name. You just carry it. This letter knew that ache. It didn't explain it. It didn't solve it. It just acknowledged it. I left the project. Not because I was forced. I left because I finally understood. What I was measuring wasn't chemistry. It was absence. It was loneliness wrapped in data. I spent so long studying emotion. I forgot how to feel it. There was more. A final section set apart like a whisper. I'm not writing to win you back. I know you're not waiting for me. But if there's even one moment from our years together that still feels real to you, know that it's real for me too. The night we sat on the roof during the blackout. That terrible road trip where we got lost and laughed anyway. The way you said my name when you weren't thinking about it. Those things weren't science. They were us. Before the rest got too loud. She didn't sign the letter with love. Not even sincerely. Just, Sophie. I folded the letter carefully. No tears came. No spark of rage. Only a soft, quiet acceptance. I walked out to the balcony. The afternoon had begun to stretch across the sky. The scent of lavender filled the air. I held the orchid in my hand for a moment, then gently tucked it into the soil beside the lavender. Not as a symbol of regret. Not even forgiveness. Just release. Because healing isn't forgetting. It's remembering without reopening the wound. And that letter, whatever else it was, had given me that. A final breath between the past and whatever came next. You don't notice the moment healing begins. It doesn't come with a bell or a banner. It arrives quietly. The way sunlight slips through a curtain without asking permission. Or how breath steadies after a long-held pause. For me, it came one morning when I didn't think of her. Not in bitterness. Not in mourning. Just didn't. No weight on my chest. No phantom sounds of her voice in the next room. The silence wasn't hollow anymore. It was whole. I kept gardening. Kept showing up. The lavender grew taller, fuller. Basil returned after the rain flattened it. The carrots sprouted awkward and crooked, but they were mine. Earned. And I changed too. Not into someone harder or colder, but someone simpler. Someone who didn't second-guess his instincts. Someone who no longer felt ashamed of needing tenderness. That summer, the community garden began organizing an open day. a kind of informal harvest celebration. I was asked if I wanted to contribute anything. I said I'd bring tea. It wasn't much, but it felt right. I picked fresh herbs the morning of the event. Mint, lemon balm, lavender from my corner plot. I steeped them in glass jars under the sun, the flavors slow dancing in warm water while I set up a small folding table and 2 chairs. The park filled with neighbors, parents, kids, people with dirt under their fingernails and smiles on their faces. No one asked questions about my life. No one needed to. That day wasn't about the past. It was about now. About the act of growing and sharing and sitting still long enough to appreciate both. I watched Al pass by, balancing a basket of tomatoes and a grin. I handed out tea in paper cups, answered questions about the herbs, and took photos for people who forgot their phones. And then, just as I was wiping down my table, a woman approached. Not Sophie. Someone else. She was tall, with sun-dark skin and a sleeve of ink on her left arm. Her eyes were calm, curious, but not invasive. She pointed to the sign I'd taped to the table. Lavender and clarity. You make that? She asked. I do. She took a sip, closed her eyes, smiled. This tastes like honesty. I laughed. Not politely, freely. Yeah, I said. That's kind of the idea. We didn't flirt. We didn't linger. She thanked me and moved on. But something about that moment, her presence, the way she accepted what was offered without expecting anything more, stayed with me. That night, I sat on my balcony with one last jar of tea, watching the city lights flicker awake. I thought about how far I'd come. From the man who waited at locked gates, to the man who brewed clarity and offered it freely. And it wasn't about revenge or validation. It was about peace. I looked at the lavender, then down at the orchid, still tucked beside it. Both were blooming. Both had roots now. And so did I. This was the end of the story. But not the end of me.